and welcome to yet another episode of Fuds on Film. I'm Scott. No, I'm not. I'm confused. So confused I forgot my own name. It's quite warm this evening, and I'm a Scot, so that's the Scot with the one T, and I'm not used to it. To help, yes.
This is the most ambitious crossover event in cinema history.
He's Scott.
Hello.
I am 90% confident that I'm Drew. We'll see whether that confidence interval changes later on or not. But yes, you know what? I'm going to quickly get into stuff that I've already written because my brain's not up for anything else tonight, apparently. As we've observed before, Hollywood, and the film industry in general, really does love to talk about itself. And there has long existed a small but strong subgenre of documentary that has sought to explore the makings, and occasionally never got mades, of films big and small. With that subgenre itself even having a subgenre documenting the fandom or legacy of certain films. For example, Best Worst Movie. So it's surely only a matter of time until we get a documentary on the documentaries, and then we can do an episode of Fuds on Film on Films on Films on Films on Film. But for now, this is just Fuds on Film on Films on Film. As this topic was his idea, Scott can perhaps correct me here, but I don't think we chose to do this, and at this moment, for any particular reason, despite the seeming recent proliferation alongside the documentary in general that has accompanied the rise of Netflix. Recent examples including Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, and The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened. As an aside, a colon subtitle in the film's title is so common it almost seems mandatory. Why must they all have the same format? I digress. Serendipitously though, we come to this topic just as Terry Gilliam's most recent attempt to film his long gestating passion project, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, has actually been completed. Although whether the legal wranglings around the film will allow anyone outside of that Cannes audience to see it is currently up in the air. We talked a little about another documentary on a Terry Gilliam film, The Hamster Factory and Other Tales of 12 Monkeys, when we did our Tech Noir episodes a couple of years ago. But today we're going to begin with addressing Gilliam's first crack at making his adaptation of Cervantes' classic novel with Lost in La Mancha. We will also take a look at Doomed, the untold story of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, a documentary about a film that did get made, but for various, uncertain, and possibly pretty crappy reasons never got released. We'll next talk about American Movie, very much on the low budget end of the scale we're covering, a story of an amateur filmmaker trying to make his dream project on very limited means. And then we're going to finish up with Hearts of Darkness, which documents a film with by far the highest budget of the subjects we're covering today, and which had a legendarily troubled shoot that severely affected the mental and physical well-being of the director and many of the actors, but managed to result in a very highly regarded, successful and award-winning film. Somehow. So, Scott, before we actually start talking about Lost in La Mancha, was there any particular reason we're covering this, or is it just happens to be that we're covering it?
More or less. It was bubbled up to the top of the list by the Cannes appearance of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, really. So it's been on our list as something we could possibly do for a while now. So this was seems as opportune a time to do it as any. And as you say, there is a bit of a golden age of these things. I mean, obviously there's been plenty of making of documentaries or featurettes going through DVDs since the advent of DVDs and Laserdiscs, but the actual most interesting tales, I think we've picked some of those here, which can kind of stand on their own as something other than just a look at how CG works in various films, which a lot of making of featurettes tend to devolve into still. So yeah, no particular reason for it other than, well, we like films and it's always interesting to see how films are made and take a look behind that particular curtain.
Fair enough then. So, on that note, let's begin with another film that in fact didn't get made, despite several aborted attempts at it right until now. So, Lost in La Mancha then, about Terry Gilliam's attempts to make The Man Who Killed Don Quixote.
Yes, so this was his first real crack at getting it onto film in space year 2000. I think it's been one of those projects that's been knocking around inside Terry Gilliam's head for quite some time. And this was originally intended as a making-of documentary and instead became a look at how fragile a film production can be. Now, Terry Gilliam's always been one of my most admired filmmakers, even if he doesn't really make many of my most admired films. Sometimes knock it out of the park and come up with something really good, but sometimes he doesn't. But I'm always glad that he's given an opportunity to actually put something on screen, because he's certainly one of the most distinctive and imaginative filmmakers that is currently still around. So it's always good to see when he's able to do his work. So it's interesting to sort of peek behind the curtain on this one, and it's clearly not the best situation for him to find himself in, which is unfortunate. But when you see the amount of design work that went into, behind The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, when you see the sets that he'd been putting up in the sound stages and the litany of things that went wrong in it, which led to its eventual shelving and insurance claim, just a really interesting film, sort of look behind the curtain for that Lost in La Mancha is. Gilliam's, as they mentioned, this one has something of a reputation of being a filmmaker whose imagination often outstrips his budget, and that can lead to him asking for more money. But that seems to be on the back of a production of the Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which was already in trouble before he got there. So in a lot of ways it seems a little bit harsh. And when you see that he's put together, or what he was planning to put together for, 20 million, I think it said it was, US dollars, it really seems to have quite an imaginative scope that he's got here. But
I think it was about 32 in the end. I think money must have been very much in his mind, because he gets very specific at one point. He does say it's $31.2 million or something like that. So I think the actual amount of money was very much in his head, but at the same time, they go to pains to stress that for a European production, European finance production, that was basically unheard of.
Yeah, and it does seem to have the scope, and I was actually expecting it to be a lot more problems than what you actually see as part of this. I mean, there's always some obvious ones where, the sound stage is kind of noisy, which was as bad, but you could work around it. And there was a flash flood, which in the first week of shooting, which took away an awful lot of their sets, which was, bad when they were on the location. They had to try and, rebuild that. But none of that seems like it's out with the possibility of working around. But the main thing that put a nail in the put a stake through the heart of the film was when the John Rochefort was injured. I think he was already injured really before he came up to set. But having someone with an injured spine, I believe it was, putting him on a horse for basically the entirety of the shoot clearly wasn't going to work. And that is the main reason why this got cancelled. At the end of the day, the lead effectively could no longer do it. And that's where the whole wrangling about the insurance claims came from at the end of the day. So it must be incredibly frustrating to be doing these kind of things where anything that's going wrong is 100% outside of your control. I can only imagine the frustration that must have when you're trying to put a film production like this together, and the amount of work and design beforehand that had gone into it. And to be honest, I'm quite surprised that Gilliam is not far more upset than he is during this, than you see him during the scenes in this film. You'd expect him to be a bit more furious, just out of the general frustration of it all. But no, he approaches it all with a fairly level head, despite what is clearly a dream project for him rapidly going down the tubes in front of him. And he must know, when Rochefort's away for 2 weeks, he must know at that point that it's gone, but he doesn't quite give up hope just yet. But so it's kind of charming to see his spirit going on with that. But yeah, it's just an interesting look at a film and how it can go bad, even when it seems like all the pieces were in place, and how quickly that can fall apart with one minor frailty happening. And yeah, so it's really quite an interesting film, and I heartily enjoyed watching it. Not altogether sure I learned all that much for it, but it did give me an appreciation for just how fragile the setup of a film can be, even when you seem to have things nailed up, lined up pretty well in advance, and how that can just go washed away like the production of in a flash flood. Yeah.
We're struggling for a metaphor there, I feel.
Washed away like a thing that is washed away.
It's really interesting. I like Terry Gilliam a lot, and I like you, Scott. He's one of those people, I guess, probably a bit like Guillermo del Toro, in that, I don't always like his finished products, but I really like that he exists, that he's making films, because there's very few people like him, and it stops everything becoming boring and samey and uniform. And I've got a considerably higher hit rate with Terry Gilliam than I do with del Toro, but it's remarkable you watch this, that he is basically not just losing it completely. Partly because they go to pains to point out that it is a passion project. Coincidentally, one of two films here in which there's actually an Orson Welles link about his aborted attempt to adapt this literary work too. It's kind of consumed Wells for a while as well. He never managed to do it. Then it's been, it's not much touched upon in the film, but it looks like Gilliam had been trying to get it made in various ways for several years, a couple of decades possibly, in one way or another. So it's a passion project, and he put a lot of work into it. And yeah, the fact when it does go downhill, he isn't just going off the deep end. It's quite remarkable. It is. Yeah, it's the fragility is the thing I keep coming back to as well, Scott. I mean, there are things that I sort of thought were red flags at the time, too, that maybe would have made the final product bad, but not necessarily production. But things like Jean Rochefort as Quixote, which kind of puzzled me a bit because you're taking probably the most famous Spanish literary character and casting him with a person who sounds incredibly French because he's incredibly French and looks like a French person because he's a French person. You're casting him in the major role of this particularly famous Spanish character. I thought that was odd, but that's maybe minor. Perhaps that's just that strange thing that people in the United States, I assume that's his main audience, that they can't tell the difference in accents or something. Which seems silly because French is possibly the most easily recognisable accent on the planet outside of a US accent.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so a couple of things like that I thought were red flags in terms of the finished product, but otherwise, you're thinking, well, I know there are things outside his control that seem to be messing with things, like the Vanessa Paradis agent kind of going back or welching on agreements or something. But when he gets his actors there, he's got Rochefort there, who'd gone as far as spending, 8 months learning English?
Yeah.
So he could actually deliver these lines well. Johnny Depp turns up, and certainly, you always have in the back of your mind, you don't know quite how it's been edited and why. But if you believe that what you see is fairly accurate, then he seems well engaged in the process. He's interested in the character, that sort of thing, so he wasn't being a problem. And a big star like that, so often you hear that they are. But so that's all going well, and you see that he's put in months and months and months of preparation. You see the costume tests and the script meetings and then the scouting and stuff, and like, things go wrong, like the flood out of nowhere in the middle of the mountains, that even when it was so bad that it changed the colour of the landscape and ruined it wasn't just the case of the rain had lost them a couple of days, it lost them their entire location.
Yeah.
So you see stuff like that, but you see it's put so much preparation in it, and then it is literally, is it 6 or 7 months before they really start in earnest the pre-production. So you see some of that, and then the film is dead within about a fortnight.
Yeah.
Principal photography begins, and it's effectively dead in a fortnight. How?
Yeah.
Like $40 million, basically, and it's gone, sorry, not 40, but $30 odd million, and it's gone in a fortnight.
Yeah.
It's just so again, it's the fragility that kind of beggars belief. They put so much effort and so much work, so much preparation, and then like that, gone.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So yeah, it's really interesting just from that point of view too. Because you can appreciate the great work and enthusiasm that's in there, and then through no apparent fault of anybody, at least not anybody involved in the shoot.
Yeah.
It stops. Weird, but very interesting film. And I was certainly very intrigued about The Man Who Killed Don Quixote now, to see what it's actually like. The original, the first notices out of Cannes aren't brilliant, but I do want to see it now, just for completeness sake, if nothing else.
Yeah, I definitely would want to see that film. Gilliam's pretty much king of the mixed notice, though, isn't he?
Yes.
I don't think he's done a film that has mixed notices. He's very much a love him or hate him filmmaker. I know each of his films, you would judge that individually. but yeah, I would certainly be looking forward to that, even if they'd have to resort to CG by casting Adam Driver. He's not a real person, I'm sure of it.
I have no riposte to that. I can't prove with paperwork that he's a real person, so
Well,
you may be correct.
I suppose talking of convincing special effects, we move on to the Roger Corman version of Fantastic Four and Doom, the documentary of that.
Yes, a quartet of superheroes consisting of Stretch Armstrong, Fire Hazard. Okay, I'll buy the magic space mutation, but how is her ability also able to affect clothes? Though I also have the same question about the Hulk, and is invisibility even a superpower? Sue, for short. And, we've run out of ideas. Rocks, I guess. Best known to the world as the Fantastic Four, arrived in the pages of Marvel Comics back in 1961, and, according to Wikipedia, helped to usher in a new level of realism in the medium. Which, for me, raises all sorts of questions about comic books prior to this. And they quickly became enduring favourites. Hard to believe now, as they're part of the incredibly slick Disney machine, but Marvel, despite their very popular characters, was an absolute show in corporate terms for a long time, and their properties were sold off piecemeal all over the place. At the start of the 1990s, when the second phase of attempted Marvel screen adaptations was getting underway, including, just to remind you, such stone-cold classics as the Dolph Lundgren starring of The Punisher and 1990s Captain America, featuring inexplicable rubber ears, and the performance from Matt Salinger that makes Dennis Quaid look like Pacino and De Niro combined. Rise to the Fantastic Four found themselves in the hand of Bernd Eichinger's Constantine film. Eichinger approached legendary and legendarily efficient producer Roger Corman and asked him to produce an adaptation of the property for $1 million. At least, that's the number regularly quoted, but the numbers in the film suggest it was more like 1.5 million. Or it was half of that, or jeebus, who knows. Hollywood accounting is something akin to magic anyway, or more accurately, fantastical, illusory, spectacularly immoral, and almost certainly criminal. A script was written, actors were hired, and production duly began in a condemned, rat-infested soundstage and reusing sets from such classics as Corman's own Jurassic Park cash-in Carnosaur. And from the beginning though, there were oddities that the cast and crew struggled to explain or understand. A curiously rushed schedule and lack of promotion amongst them, culminating in a passionate and dedicated crew sneaking the print out of the production offices at night so they could do post-production on their own time and often their own dime. While it does cover much of the story of production in a fairly familiar way for these things, it is the mystery of what happened and why that is the central focus of Marty Langford's documentary. He has assembled contemporary interviews with all of the main cast members, the director, editor, and several other notable members of the crew, and even managed to get some time with Roger Corman himself. But of course, Corman is too canny an operator to allow himself to be recorded getting into details of what really went down. There is some archive footage from production, and a pretty decent chunk of footage from the finished article, which is interesting given that the film has never actually been legally released. Doom's central question is also the film's biggest failing though, the what and the why of the thing. The legend is that the film was produced solely in order to retain the rights, with no intention of ever releasing the film. But that's not a theory that seems particularly credible, though many of the talking points are about this. Certainly, however, something was iffy from an early stage, and several theories are advanced as to who did what and why, but the film fails to get to the bottom of it, instead just presenting each player's favourite theory. No doubt this is because no one outside of one or two people, and perhaps not even Roger Corman, know the truth. Regardless though, it leaves a strong feeling of disappointment and lack of satisfaction with the documentary's central narrative. Fortunately though, while exploring that thread, Langford has found something at least as, if not more, engaging, and that is the passion, excitement, and surprising lack of bitterness of a group of actors and filmmakers who thought that the Fantastic Four would be their big break. People like Alex Hyde-White, who played Reed Richards, and particularly director Ole Sisson, are engaging, pragmatic, and, even given 20 years to cool down, surprisingly sanguine. In the end, it plays like something of an underdog story, and it's hard not to root for them, albeit pointlessly as it's in retrospect. These people weren't movie stars, they were working actors, The director and his crew weren't pretentious prima donnas or troubled artists. They were skilled technicians trying to do their best. There are many reasons films fail, or fail to be released, but lack of passion or hard work certainly weren't amongst them on this project. The effects are ropey, the sets are shonky, sure, and some of the performances are a bit earnest. But this version of these Marvel favourites has orders of magnitude more charm than any of the three soulless, turgid adaptations that Fox has pooped out. In the end, what is left is a deep sense of injustice as the secret agendas of the executives and moneymen mess with the careers and livelihoods of people just trying to do the best job that they could. Which is to say, I quite enjoyed this film, so I would recommend watching it, if that's what you're looking for.
Yes, me too. I don't know if anything, maybe watching this gave me a warmer feeling towards the actual final product, which may not have been legally released, but, well, hello internet.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
It's not difficult to find if you wish to do so.
Yeah, so I did give that a look, and to be honest, you really see most of the interesting parts as part of this documentary, so you could probably save yourself that trick. While I agree with a lot of people, it does have more heart and charm than the big budget monstrosities that came, I guess in the first case, fairly shortly after this.
When was the first Fantastic Four? So like 1999, something around that kind of time, the Fox one, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe a wee bit later, 2001 or something. But not massively long after it.
I think we want to check now. Oh, it was 2005 actually. That's a bit...
Really? Okay, it was a decade after. It felt like less time.
Yeah. Those didn't really capture anyone's imagination in particular. I'm still not sure how that first one got a sequel. That's sheer bloody mindedness in effect, rather than anything that the quality of it would demand. And while this is chintzy in comparison to the Corman Fantastic Four version, it's probably closer to the comic books than any of the other stuff was. And certainly more heart to it and more imagination. And certainly you can appreciate all the work around they've done for the limited special effects they were able to afford, and they've done their best to stitch this together as a film when it wasn't in any meaningful way ready to be put as a film. It's heartening to see all that kind of dedication and the commitment they've shown to putting something out that they thought could give themselves a better break. Not just the actors, of course, who think that was their big break, but all the people behind the scenes, editors and all that, who were looking for that to have that in their show reel as well. So I can kind of see why they'd want to go ahead and put this through and try and get this into cinemas. And it's a shame that legal wranglings kind of took that away from them. But again, you can kind of understand it. I mean, I suppose if you're Marvel and you're hard to argue with Marvel's business plan of late. They've, much as you can disagree with it, they've made quite a bit of money, and I think, and part of that was reeling back into licenses like this, which had been floating around indirectly. It took them a bit longer to bring. Well, they still haven't brought Fantastic Four in. I don't know if they'll bother at this point.
Well, they're going to do it basically by Disney buying almost all of Fox's movie properties.
Yeah, that goes.
Pretty expensive way to do it, but there we go.
Yes, so. But yeah, a really interesting film. I'm basically repeating everything you say there, Drew. It's a really engaging cast, and it's nice to hear them talk about this in fairly measured tones. And it's a really interesting story, and I agree completely. It's unfortunate that there's no real answer to it. I suspect the answer is that Avi Arad was just didn't want to see something as low rent as this appear, when I think at that point they had at least a plan to get their together, and were in the early stages of pushing that through. So, yeah, unfortunately we don't have a gospel truth on that, but I think we can read behind the lines and get fairly close on it. But regardless, it's just a really interesting look at a film that almost got out and almost was made for much less money you'd expect, certainly given the budgets that go into comic book movies these days. So, yeah, really interesting contrast with what's going on at the minute.
Even just for money that goes into a film at all, I kept thinking this during it and watching the actual finished product. Well, finished, you know what I mean by... it's finished-ish final product. That for an individual, $1 million is a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
For a film, particularly a film that has special effects, it's no money at all.
Yeah.
And the fact that the film looks as good as it does for that amount of money is nothing short of incredible.
Yeah.
Particularly, okay, the Fantastic Four outfits, while they do look like the comic books, look homemade, but even then, the character makes them herself in the film, so that kind of works actually. But the the Thing costume is incredible.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can quite easily imagine that costing $1 million on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it may just be rubber, but there's some really impressive animatronics underneath it. It looks really good, and it's at least the equal of the Thing in the first two Fox films, if
Yeah.
not better. And so there's some genuine skill involved here. And then a lot of people too that really believed in it, like the composers paying $8,000 of their own money to make sure they could have a full orchestra to record the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing about this film. You do feel so bad for these people because they thought they were working on something that was going to be their big break, and you can't enforce that, but at least they thought it was going to be released.
Yeah.
You know, so they could point to a film and say, look, I'd like to go for this job. Why should we hire you? Well, look, I did this. And you can look at it. But the film didn't exist, so as Alice Son points out in the film, yeah, you can't say, look at my previous work, well, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, when was it released? No, it wasn't. Oh, well, but
Yeah.
it doesn't exist then, so you can't use that even if you did clearly very good work on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shame to see any sort of effort and talent just wasted. If it's going to sit on a shelf somewhere, then it has been effectively a waste of effort, and it's not like the people involved really cut any corners or were particularly unmotivated to do it. You know, they've really given it as good an effort as could be mustered under the circumstances, and it's a shame to see that go to waste. So I hope they're gratified by it somewhat floating out in the black market and Comic Cons and such like, and of course the advent of BitTorrents maybe giving it a bit more reach, and it's hopefully giving them something of a delayed gratification to it. But if nothing else, it's probably more interesting, I think, if you're a film fan, to watch the documentary Doomed rather than the Fantastic Four film itself. But
yes, I think between that and if you, for instance, episode of Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst, where they cover Supergirl, the Roger Corman, the Fantastic Four, and the version of Captain America I mentioned in my introduction. And you see enough footage in that, between that and this documentary, rather than the film's not particularly good. No. Again, it still has an awful lot more watchability than the Fox versions.
but it's a low bar.
Yes, that is to damn it with faint praise. The other thing I would mention in this, just that because I kind of wish there was more of this, is that this film doesn't paint Stan Lee in a particularly flattering light, and from everything I've heard, that's probably the more believable way of Stan Lee. He's so feted, and he has these little cameo in every Marvel film, certainly from the MCU stuff.
Yeah,
and certainly you hear him in interviews, he's quite an engaging person, but everything you've heard about him is like he's not a particularly nice guy.
No,
he's been accused of taking pretty much every other co-worker's credit.
Yeah, he's a savvy operator, isn't he?
Marvel began, and in this, they show him coming to the set, and he talks to them and says, "Oh, you're doing a good job," and we like it. And then you see this footage of him basically completely stabbing them in the back at Comic Con, San Diego Comic Con that year. I think there should be a bit more of an examination of Stan Lee like that, because he's Stan Lee's. If you were to believe Stan Lee, basically created everything. Yeah, he's a bit like the Douglas Trumbull of comic books, probably more nefarious. Yeah. I don't really have a particularly good way to finish that thought, so I'll just stop mid sentence. Okay, Scott, going from fairly scantily budgeted comic book films to, well, a film with basically no budget at all.
Yes,
with American Movie.
American Movie sees documentary maker Chris Smith, who would later go on to make last year's, I think it was, Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, which is another really interesting documentary.
Is that the one that's behind the scenes of Man on the Moon?
Exactly, yes, which I heartily recommend. It's not really about filmmaking as much as more about the acting process, but that's very interesting. But this was, I believe, his first film, where he follows amateur Milwaukee filmmaker Mark Borchardt as he initially tries to start production on his imagined opus Northwestern before realising that this was nowhere near ready to go, and falls back on completing a horror short, Coven, which had been in and out of production for years. Now, while American Movie is a look at the independent filmmaking scene in a way, and I'm sure many independent movies face many of the same struggles as Borchardt does, this is certainly no how-to guide, and it's in the end much more a character study of Borchardt himself. And this, I'd argue, maybe makes it a far more interesting film. Yeah, so I mean, if you, as you were kind of alluding to earlier, when you think about the 1 million to cover all aspects of a film, and there's a lot of people scrabbling around trying to make their first features, and for even less than that, and basically nothing is they've got in this. And independent filmmakers often have to assume so many roles. You're director, you're also cinematography, you're also doing the writing of it, and all these quote roles you have to do just to get it done. And it's just, when you think of how overwhelming that must be, even with a relatively smaller scale scope, if you're not going for the super high budget CG laden stuff, you're still an awful lot of responsibility to fall on your shoulders. And it's a miracle that any of this at all gets made, even some of them ending up becoming successful and making a career, like the likes of Clerks and Kevin Smiths and all that kind of stuff. For every one of those, there must be hundreds of things that just got nowhere. And while Borchardt has the drive and the determination and the motivation to be a filmmaker, he doesn't appear to have any other skill set that would enable him to be able to make a film. So it's an interesting film to watch, and it's funny in places, but I did feel a bit funny. I did feel a bit ashamed about laughing at this guy, because while he's, I'd argue, somewhat delusional in what he's trying to do, in the position that he's got himself into, he just seems so earnest about wanting to make films that it's tough not to root for the guy. He's quite a likeable and engaging presence, and that's what makes American Movie quite a fun film to watch, I think. Maybe being a bit harsh saying that he doesn't have the skill set to actually make a movie. I think he could have made quite a successful, I don't know, maybe second unit or special effects kind of guy, because you see some sort of hints from other films that he's done where he seems to have a handle on that kind of stuff.
I think he has technical ability for, yes, exactly, so special effects. You see some of his like 8mm stuff and 60mm stuff in childhood, with his gore effects and stuff. You could do technical stuff like that. I don't think he's a filmmaker.
No, he doesn't seem to have the personal skill set to actually deal with the logistics and all that stuff. Certainly the way that he started to take on pretty much every aspect of it. You have some people who are supposed to be helping him with casting and other production assistants, but other production assistants basically just seem to be the mates he drinks with, and their duties are mainly drinking with him. So it's not conducive to actually making a particularly great film. And he can't schedule actors. He's got to get his mum in to play various roles and all these other things. It's just a little bit of a sort of self-parody going on almost. But I still think it's a really interesting film, and he's actually managed to get some actors in there that are actually kind of interesting. I particularly liked the guy that looked like some kind of Poundland Brian Cox that he's got as part of the Coven cast.
Yeah, I couldn't decide whether that was a real English accent or not. I assumed it was an affectation.
Yes.
Also, he looked very much like Poundland Brian Cox. I like that that reference. He looked very much like the one-armed man from Twin Peaks.
Yes, that's it as well. Yeah,
he really looked like the one-armed man from Twin Peaks. Yeah, but it's like he's a kind of local theatre guy who thinks he's a great Shakespearean actor.
Yes.
And for the whole film, I couldn't decide if he's an English guy who lived in Milwaukee, which is possible, although possibly playing on the fact that he's English, so thinking that people will think he's more of a thespian. Or half of me is thinking, is he putting that accent on? I couldn't decide if that was real or not.
Yeah. It all gets a bit for your consideration at that point, doesn't it? But I think this was quite a fun movie to watch. How much it's taught me about the process of filmmaking, not that much. But it's a really fascinating look into the psyche of this Mark Borchardt character, and bless him, he's still trying to make films, at least as far as his IMDb and Wikipedia pages are claiming. So at least he's not giving up on that dream, even if it does mean that he's spent, by this point, 30 years doing a paper round, effectively, as his main source of income, which, I don't know, you might think this is the universe maybe telling you to move on and try something different, he said without a hint of irony. But yes, it's just quite an interesting movie on that basis. As I say, not something that's a how-to guide for independent filmmaking success, but certainly look at the flip side of that when it all goes horribly wrong. And also I'm really charmed by his uncle, I think it is. Who's
Uncle Bill, yes, I like Uncle Bill.
Who is probably the finest actor I've ever seen.
That's the bit. Yeah, Uncle Bill's was probably my favourite part of it. There's he's just kind of like this crotchety old guy who I actually would have loved to have seen more about Uncle Bill because
Yes.
he's saying he's got $280,000 in the bank.
Yeah, which I initially thought, nah, you don't, mate. And then, oh, seems like he does.
Well,
Seems
yeah,
like he
because
does.
yes, but at the end of the film, he left Mark what's it? It wasn't as much as $100,000,
I
like
think it's 50, I think.
$50,000 to make Northwestern, which is a hell of a generous firm to do. Very nice of him.
Yeah.
They clearly did believe him, and in the end, but yeah, I'm watching this guy and I'm thinking, you're living in this kind of ratty trailer
Yeah.
in a trailer park, and you are eating terrible food, and it's not very clean, and you've got terrible clothes. Why are you doing that if you've got $280,000? And then I thought, quite quickly afterwards,
That's
I suspect he's got $280,000 because he spent his entire life living in a trailer,
yeah.
eating crappy food and not caring about stuff. Because you get people like that. I guess the best word is miser.
Mhm.
But he's lived very, very frugally.
Yeah.
For his whole life. Utterly pointlessly, of course, because what are you going to do with the money when you're dead? You're dead. Whereas you could have had a much more enjoyable life. But he's a fascinating character. And he's quite crotchety, and you think, some of the time you're thinking, he's not sure what's going on, but you thought, no, there's a steel trap of a mind going on under there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he's just laughing at the world behind that, and he's getting fed up of, they do get up to like take 50 or something on one line that they're trying to get him to read.
Yeah.
And then he just goes, no, that's I'm not doing anymore, and drives away.
Yeah. And again, it's easy to sort of make a bit of a comedy figure out of Mark Borchardt's charm, but again, he's in there dedicated to trying to do his thing. He's in there cutting coven, on the night shift between, was it one of the university film production reels, stitching this together in the old days by, with actual film and film and sellotape. And he's putting hours in. He's getting the work done effectively. He's got the drive for it, and he's putting hours in. It's just that the results don't seem to be particularly worthwhile doing at the end of the day. But he's trying, and I can respect that, and I can applaud that. So that's good for him. I'm pleased that he's doing that, and presumably getting some sort of joy out of it, even if it's probably something that's never going to be a mass market success.
I am a little torn on this film. Seems clear that I didn't get as much enjoyment from it as you did, and I didn't find it particularly funny. But the big problem I had, certainly Mark seems dedicated to making his film, which is to be commended. And as we mentioned earlier, he clearly has some sort of technical skill. He can do a good effect shot, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think he really has the vision to create a good script and to have to do the overall thing. I can see him get a job in the film industry, yes, in special effects, as you said, it's got something like that. The problem is, right from the start, I didn't warm to him as a person.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That's one of the main reasons I didn't get an awful lot out of it. Because I kind of thought he was a prat. And then it's perhaps around the halfway mark, but he keeps coming back to after that. Basically seems to think that he's better than other people. And he very clearly states things like that he's better than other people because he wants to make this film, and that people who are just doing a regular job are basically losers, and it really, really turned me sour on him.
Yeah, that is one of the more negative aspects of his character. Yeah, he does have a certain degree of unearned arrogance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in terms of the humour things, though, a lot of that was saved by his best friend, the guy that's on the cover with him.
Yeah.
Because every time he's on screen, I was like, I was just saying, are you on? Have you been plugged in? Hello, Earth to man. So, I'm not convinced he knew at any point in that film, which covers, it's about a year it covers, I think, isn't it? Plus some archive footage. But at no point that you see him, I don't think he was aware of what planet he was on, what he was doing, where he was, or indeed who he was.
Mm-hmm.
He just seemed really, really happy that he'd bought lots of drugs and bought lots of scratch cards. But the rest of the time, it's like, are you switched on? have you tried turning yourself off and on again? So I got quite a lot of amusement out of that guy because he's a strange man. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any particular malice in him, so I didn't have the problem with him that I had with Mark. But yeah, it's Mike. Is he Mike?
Yes.
Is
I
he
think that's
Mike
right.
Shank? I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, but that guy's just okay. He's like, he's such a kind of, it's beyond stoner character because I don't know how to describe him well because there's no believable way to describe that you think he was an actual person, because if he was a character in a fiction, you would think, yeah, this person needs to have any characterization at all, and I just don't buy this guy. Whereas like, he's a real person. He's a real person that the universe apparently forgot to write. So I had quite a lot of entertainment from that. But yeah, certainly in terms of learning anything about the craft of filmmaking or the struggle to make films, I'm not particularly sure I got anything out of American Movie.
No.
But Uncle Bill, though. Uncle Bill was great. And his mum's a saint, because the patience she must have, the way he talks to her.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It does get into almost touching on what seems to be like borderline, if not personality disorder, some sort of alcohol addiction, or certainly there's something bubbling under the way of this guy that's not quite right, but it doesn't quite go into any depth of that. But yeah, I think there's certainly issues that need to be addressed with his behaviour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so not one that I would particularly recommend, but it's certainly interesting. It has interesting moments in it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I would give it. I recommend it though.
Shall we move on, Scott?
Yes.
To very much the other end of the budget scale here.
Yes. Other end of budget and success scale with Hearts of Darkness, which is about a little indie film called Apocalypse Now, which is very, very much the other end of indie filmmaking.
It's indeed, it's one of those low budget things like Infinity War that we talked about last episode. Hearts of Darkness, Filmmaker's Apocalypse. The colon and subtitling in use even in 1991 documents the troubled production. 238 days of principal photography for one film of Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam War epic Apocalypse Now. A sort of apocalypse then, if you will. Oh, you won't? Well, screw you, buddy, I've got the mic. Sorry, but apparently the heat and humidity sent everyone on the shoot in the Philippines a bit screwy, so I'm just trying to get into the mood as I'm a bit warm in this room. Many of these types of documentaries rely on often after the fact interviews, and even those with an on-set presence struggle to convey true feelings. Of those we've covered so far tonight, only American Movie really has felt like it contained any truly personal or unguarded moments. What sets Hearts of Darkness apart in this regard, at least theoretically, is that the production footage was taken by Coppola's wife Eleanor and features candid audio from the director, also captured by his wife, that he didn't know was being recorded. This audio was, it is claimed, to be used only as a guide for the production diary, but its use gives a rare insight into Coppola's thoughts at the time. Looking for the next big project after The Godfather and its sequel for himself and his production company American Zoetrope, Coppola settled on Apocalypse Now, an adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, written by John Milius and originally planned to be directed by George Lucas, and was a project which had also inflamed the passion of a pre-Citizen Kane Orson Welles, though even then its lavish production scared off the film studio. Apocalypse Now became a legendarily troubled and chaotic shoot, with original lead Harvey Keitel sacked, his replacement Martin Sheen suffering a near-fatal heart attack at the age of 37, tropical storms, helicopters hired from the Filipino government whisked away with no notice to fight communist insurgents, 14-year-old actors who lied about their age, other actors drinking and consuming large quantities of drugs, huge budget overruns, constant rewrites, and, often, shooting schedules which declared more or less, Christ knows, I guess we'll make it up when we get to set, and a truculent, expensive, and woefully unprepared star as the antagonist. Despite this, most of this film, alas, did little for me, and for all its proclamations about Coppola following the spiritual tormented descent of the characters of Conrad's novels, and the director's own assertion that we were in the jungle, there were too many of us, we had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little we went insane. I don't think the film really demonstrates that in any meaningful way. It may tell us that the jungle drove them crazy, but it just doesn't show it. However, it is in the film's final portion that things really pick up, and an element that could truly be believed to have driven people crazy is introduced. Legendary actor, and, if preparation for this episode has taught me anything, total douche canoe Marlon Brando. Willfully unhelpful truly undersells Brando, especially when there are so many much more apt epithets, many of them sharing a combination of rear quarters and various items of headwear. That the film was so successfully completed, and Brando's performance so striking and memorable, is pretty good grounds on which to dub Coppola genius, and also to marvel at his iron will and patience. And that's good for Coppola, because much of the rest of the film doesn't paint him in a particularly flattering light. Flitting from childish tantrum to wallowing in great troughs of woe is me, the great and troubled artist self-pity. And, of course, his deeply caring. Even if he dies, I don't want to hear anything but good news until it comes from me. If Marty dies, I want to hear everything is okay until I say Marty is dead, after Sheen's heart attack. As an audience, we might feel considerably more sympathy to the unravelling of his grand plans, if his response to the immense cyclone which battered the Philippines during shooting, killing hundreds and displacing thousands more, wasn't presented here as some of our sets got a bit broken. Wah! It has to be said, though, that Coppola clearly had a vision, and despite genuine difficulties and setbacks, he brought that vision to the screen. Though whether that merited a 49-minute longer version in Apocalypse Now Redux is debatable. But hey, this could have been a George Lucas film. Because of him speaking about it earlier, this will sound, Scott, like I'm being passive-aggressive. I am not, I'm just angry at the whole world. It's pronounced redux. The word is redux from the Latin reducere, and anybody who pronounces it redo is a moron. Sorry, these things bother me so. I had originally been going to say that I have too many problems with this film to recommend it to a general audience, except for fans of Apocalypse Now. But with a few days' thought, I think it actually put it up a notch, as I think Hearts of Darkness does a better job than many films in the genre of really showing how a film got made, and also very nearly didn't.
Yeah, I would certainly recommend people watch it. If you're interested in films, and if you're listening to a film podcast, you're probably interested in films.
Presumably so, yes.
I think if you're going to recommend it to any audience, it's probably going to be the people that listen to stuff like this. Now, largely what you're saying, Coppola doesn't come off particularly well in it. I guess you can kind of see part of that as just him being so wrapped up in this and being so involved in it that he's not, he's got the shutters on. He's not quite seeing the wider scope of things, but it does come across as obviously incredibly crass and sensitive when when things like cyclones strike, and his only concern is what it's doing to the film production, and the way that he's pushing actors to go out in limbs that I'm not 100% sure they're entirely comfortable out in being, and things like that. At the end of the day, everyone signed up to this with their eyes open. I don't think there was really anything that was there's no impropriety here in terms of things like Martin Sheen's performance. And the most interesting thing, the thing that really picks up to me was I was kind of enjoying it okay for the hour or so where it's getting to it, but it's when Brando appears in his trademark Brando style, and when you see what he's working with there, and the fact that he managed to, in the edit, get anything useful as an ending.
I know.
When basically, Coppola himself was kind of admitting he didn't really have an ending. He was just getting Sheen and Brando in the same room and having them sort of just bounce off each other and see what comes out with it at the end.
Yeah, they say that Brando not only was unprepared, he had never read Hearts of Darkness, is clearly massively disrespectful of other people's time and money, which I found very much from another film that I may mention in a minute, not particularly cover for this, but I did watch anyway, and that the only way that Coppola can get anything is basically 3 weeks of improvisation.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose in one way it proves that Brando is a fantastically gifted actor. I don't think that was ever any doubt, but he's a pretty terrible person.
Yeah.
But how Coppola got anything usable out of that is quite frankly beyond me.
Yeah. I did watch Apocalypse Now Radox, I think you say it should be pronounced.
Thank you.
Radox, right? Yeah,
Radox, yes,
named
it's
after
a bubble bath.
Yeah, so I watched Apocalypse Now, matey, after this, and it's too damned long.
Matey! So I just realised what you said. It's a long time since I've thought of Matey, Scott. Children's bubble bath from the 1980s.
Yes,
I think he still exists.
Yes, it's a sort of deep cut bubble bath reference you can expect from this podcast.
We've got our pulse on pop culture's wrist.
Um,
We've got our finger with pop culture's pulse. Yes, I can't even speak. I'm so thrown by the Matey reference.
And what struck me is the bits that seem to be, and I must admit, it's been so long, like yourself was mentioned when we were talking about this before, it's been so long since I saw the non-Radox version of Apocalypse Now that I can't really remember it. So, but it did appear that all the things that were added in to the longer version was the things that he was unhappy with and mentioned during the Hearts of Darkness thing. You know, when he's talking about the scene in the French plantation
Scene, yeah.
and the dinner that never seemed to work out properly. I think that all that was excised and then added back in, but that's quite a big chunk of that extra nearly hour that went into the film again. So it's very much stuff that he didn't like that is now put back into it, and I don't think it really made it any better a film. It's just longer, almost gruelingly long.
It made it longer, Scott. That's it really should be called Apocalypse Now Radox because it's 3 hours 15 minutes. You probably want a nice relaxing bath in that time.
Yes. But yeah, it was certainly something that shed more light on that process. So it does kind of work on that basis as well. If you want to see what a director coming back to a film, years later and thinking about it again and seeing the kind of change of perspective, because presumably he must have changed his mind on that. I'm assuming he didn't just recut it on a whim as something to do one afternoon. He must have thought that he's changed his mind on what constituted an important part of the story, and I'm not entirely sure he's right about it, but who am I to argue? I didn't make the film. So yes, I mean, it's certainly, if you're a fan of Apocalypse Now, then it's a highly recommended viewing, but I think in a more general terms, even if you're not a fan of that film in particular, it's just an interesting look into the filmmaking process, particularly when things eventually go right. I mean, you can't argue with the results of Apocalypse Now. It's a film if you don't personally like. It was obviously very successful and influential, and it's very interesting to see the creative process behind that, particularly when it's so storied, shall we say. Yeah, I would recommend this as well to anyone. There's nothing here that I particularly disliked, and I think if you're, as I say, if you're the kind of person who's interested in films and the making of films, then I think all of these have something to recommend to them in various forms and are well worth your investment of time if you can get hold of them.
Yeah, I mean, the one I'm least interested in is American Movie, but of the films we have talked about, Scott, I wouldn't particularly dissuade anybody from watching it, any or all of them. Actually, they're all pretty interesting in different ways.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to just very briefly add a couple. We had originally been going to do Lost Soul. It's another one of these ones with a ridiculously long subtitle. Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. Which Craig watched and didn't like and warned us off of, so we actually swapped that out for Hearts of Darkness. I watched it anyway, and I actually quite enjoyed it. Now, one of Craig's issues was that he said it was 2 hours of Richard Stanley completely failing to justify how his adaptation of the Island of Dr. Moreau would not be a complete cluster cuddle. And he's absolutely right, but I still actually kind of found it entertaining because Richard Stanley's barking mad. And when he begins talking about, in absolute earnestness, about how his film got made, he got like the job to do the film because of his friend doing witchcraft for him, and he's absolutely serious about it. I'm like, right, I'm on board because this guy's crazy, brilliant. And then later on, it's like he blames witchcraft for it all going wrong as well.
Witchcraft giveth and witchcraft taketh away.
That's it. It's the truth of the universe you need to be very aware of, Scott. And so I actually found that really intended. And there are a couple of links to films we actually covered in this podcast. One is that Orson Welles was also on board to do The Island of Dr. Moreau at some point. Sorry, I'm getting my head confused.
I think, yeah.
Well, no, but there is a connection, but because the story, The Island of Dr. Moreau, H.G. Wells was really annoyed by Joseph Conrad because he basically thought Joseph Conrad stole The Island of Dr. Moreau for Hearts of Darkness. But then Joseph Conrad said that the Kurt's character was actually based on Henry Morton Stanley, the famous American explorer, journalist fella that went looking for Livingstone, who is in fact Richard Stanley's great-grandfather, and that Orson Welles was also involved in trying to make an adaptation of Hearts of Darkness, but then Marlon Brando was in an adaptation of Hearts of Darkness and in the adaptation of Island of Dr. Moreau. I find the connections all quite interesting, is what I'm saying. But the second part is that Marlon Brando's a total douche canoe, as I mentioned earlier, because he turns up, again, like in Apocalypse Now, with a staggering salary for agreeing to do basically 3 weeks' work or something.
Yeah.
Turns up, isn't prepared, wants to change everything, and is just a complete pillock on the set of the Island of Dr. Moreau, on a film that was already an absolute mess and had already had Val Kilmer on it, who was particularly at that time regarded as being one of the world's premier pillocks. But Marlon Brando turns up on set and starts wanting to do a completely crazy thing. I creased myself laughing. Marlon Brando said, right, how about this for the ending of the film? Because for some reason he wanted to wear a hat for the entire time he was on screen. And said, how about at the end of the film, Dr. Moreau takes the hat off and you find out that he's actually a dolphin. And I creased myself.
How would that work?
I don't care. I just want it to have happened. So it's full of stuff like that, but so that I'm sort of liking Marlon Brando, and some of the people were talking, some of the producers are saying, right, figure that Marlon Brando was basically messing with us.
Mm-hmm.
And if he had been, I would almost have been on board with that. And so you see that, it's like, he's taking the piss, right? And then he says, but then he starts with all this other nonsense, and he refuses to come out of his hut, and then he spends like the entire day just talking to John Frankenheimer, then he never actually produce anything, and he's wanting to change everything, and he can't stand Val Kilmer, so those two people will never get on. And then I'm thinking, yeah, but you're being completely disrespectful of other people's time and money and livelihoods. These actors have been stuck in this remote part of Australia for months now, and they can't actually finish their job because you've decided that you're more important. You're getting paid millions, but apparently these people who are just on the standard salary for like equity actors or whatever, kind of stuck there and they're not allowed to go back to their families.
Yeah.
So it just makes like, I don't care if you're a good actor, you're a pillock, Brando.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the interesting aspects of that film. So I actually, I would recommend Lost Soul, because there's so much barking mad stuff going on, and that line about the dolphin is one of the best things I've ever heard in my entire life. But yeah, that's probably worth checking out. And I did watch also The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened. It was a really awkwardly punctuated title, that which was the story of what would have been Tim Burton's Superman film, it was scheduled to come out in 1987, 1988 time, was replaced instead by Wild Wild West, because Warner Brothers then and now don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think they just locked into the Lord of the Rings film through their subsidiary New Line, because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
New Line subsidiary? They said they've got a long-standing relationship with it. Anyway, but that's actually a really interesting film about all the work, kind of like Lost in La Mancha, about a lot of pre-production work that went into for an interesting film whose films I don't always like, but again, I appreciate that they exist.
Yeah.
Because they make distinctive, interesting films. And so if you have a taste for any more of these sorts of films, definitely check out What Happened to Superman Lives if you can. It's pretty interesting. And there's, as I was saying to you earlier, Scott, there's this photograph that was quite infamous of Nick Cage with the long hair and the half-finished Superman suit and the kind of really dopey look in his face. It was so disingenuous because it's a still taken mid-blink from a costume test, a screen test. And it's actually, Nicolas Cage would have been quite an interesting Superman. And it may have been a mess, but it would have been an interesting mess, and it would have been considerably more appealing than most of the Zack Snyder stuff, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you've got a taste for these sort of films, I would recommend that one as well, because it's a really interesting look at the work that's gone into it. There's some really interesting ideas, some really interesting concept art that I'm like, yeah, you know what? This would probably be a horrible mess, but I really want to see this film now.
Yeah.
Which is what the best of these things can do, I think, is make you really interested for a project that never actually came to fruition.
Yeah.
I suppose, the Island of Dr. Moreau, because Lost Soul makes you think, yeah, definitely not watching that then. I'd heard it was bad, now I see why.
I guess if we're throwing in recommendations for other things, we already mentioned one I think is worth looking at, the Hamster Factor, which is the making of the 12 Monkeys.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is very good. If you're talking about pre-production art and such like, then you've got to give a nod to Jodorowsky's Dune, which we'll probably cover in some form eventually. I'm hoping the actual Dune film does actually happen with what's his face, your director fella, Villeneuve.
So yeah, I'd forgotten that Denis Villeneuve had been associated with an adaptation of Dune.
Yeah, so
is it working on? Is it kind of based on the Jodorowsky idea? Is it
no,
a continuation of that? Or is it just separate?
Lord no. And it's worth watching Jodorowsky's just to see how bananas that would be, and I don't think Denis Villeneuve would look anything like it. But yeah, it's a really interesting film as well to look at, and when we're talking about Blade Runner, I suppose, with Villeneuve, then there's a Dangerous Days, the making of the original Blade Runner as well, which is also quite interesting if you're into that sort of thing.
Excellent.
Okay, so yes, that will take us to the end of this podcast. We'll be back in 10 days and I'll look at another couple of films. But until that time, if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so. Probably on the Twitters would be your best bet. Or we're on Twitter at FudsOnFilm, or you can do so on Facebook, facebook.com/FudsOnFilm. Nothing on the Twitters, right? So yes, until next time, take care of yourself and each other. I've been Scott Morris, and Drew Tavendale has been Drew Tavendale.
Undeniably so.
Ta-ta.
Fairly well.